Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled mother-in-law got me arrested under false charges to steal my inherited property. I got her sent to jail instead. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. Next time you think that you have the worst mother-in-law in the world for making a snarky comment over Christmas dinner, you can remember this story of how my mother-in-law got me arrested and almost sent to prison for years. There is a ton to unpack with this story, so I'm just going to get started and fill in the blanks for background when needed. My uncle had passed away, and since he had no children of his own, he passed down his house to me. At the time, I did not know that my mother-in-law was getting fake documents to say that she was the one that inherited and owned the house. I did not have a house yet, and this was a perfect place to move in with my wife. A couple months before this whole thing started, she had gotten into a car accident and been in the hospital. She was unconscious in a coma due to some brain trauma from the crash, and they wanted her to stay in this coma until she was healed. I'm not a doctor, but if one is reading this, maybe you can leave a comment explaining it. This was one reason that my mother-in-law and I were around each other all the time. I already did not like her, but for the sake of my wife, I was trying my best to put up with her. I knew she hated me and made it clear before I married my wife that she did not want her daughter to marry me and instead marry somebody rich. I was not expecting the police to come barging into my house screaming at me to get on the ground and being cuffed though. Then them walking in with a gun and telling me that I was under arrest for having it. For those that don't know, I live in Brunei and it is 100% illegal to own a gun here. There is no gray area. The thing is that I never had a gun, but they didn't believe me when I said that. I had no idea where it came from. When I found out the rest of my charges, I found out that not only was I being arrested for having the gun, but also trespassing and stealing the house from the proper owner. Again, they did not listen when I said I was the owner, because now to them I was just a gun-owning criminal. That was when I found out that my mother-in-law apparently had papers saying that she was the true owner of my property. With my wife in a coma, I did not have anybody to help me, so it was just my word against hers. They seemed to want to believe her, and I was terrified that I was going to end up in jail for potentially years when I had not done anything wrong. I was lucky enough that they were not going to keep me in jail while they worked everything out and instead released me to go get a lawyer and wait for a day in court to decide my punishment. I couldn't go back home because I found mother-in-law living in it and my stuff had been thrown outside for trash. I was so angry and trying to find some way to prove that it was my house and that I did not own a gun. I just want to say that I'm not a rich man and I'm not a highly educated man either. This combination meant that it was likely that I was going to end up in jail. The thing is that I'm still a smart man and knew that I could find something to prove that I was innocent. One thing that I did know is that to get a gun here, you basically have to go and smuggle it in from a neighboring country. I won't say where for obvious reasons, but basically I had to show that I had not traveled there. On top of that, I had to try and open an investigation against my mother-in-law. While I did not have much money, I was lucky enough that one of my uncle's friends was a lawyer and willing to help me out for free as a favor. We were able to open a dispute that would check two different things. It would check to see my mother-in-law's travel history to see if she had been to the country where she could get a gun. Also, we would need to get fingerprint samples of the gun to show that I had never touched it and mother-in-law probably had since she was too cocky to be careful. I was glad about that because it did delay my processing of going to jail once they found out, and she indeed did recently travel to that country for a very short period of time. That plus prints coming up for her and not me now caused the police to start to believe the story that I was telling them instead. I had not been able to show them documents that proved I owned the house because they were in the house that I was not allowed in. It was like being stuck in an endless loop that I couldn't find a way out. Instead, they looked into the history of the past owner, which was my uncle. How it showed he had no connection with mother-in-law and it would not have made any sense for her to be the one to inherit the house. Finally, the police allowed me to enter my own house supervised to show them where the papers were. Luckily, mother-in-law did not know where I kept them and they avoided getting thrown out. I will say this much, her documents looked extremely real and I have a feeling it was another thing she got done in the other country. The police were finally willing to drop the charges against me and instead turned them onto my mother-in-law. While owning a gun is illegal, getting caught smuggling one into the country is way worse. It makes sense because they want to catch people actually doing it, not just the people in Brunei buying them illegally. That was not everything though, because she had committed a couple of other crimes that are taken seriously here. She had forged official documents and that alone carried a sentence of additional jail time. Then it came down to her trying to frame me for owning a gun and getting me sent to jail, as well as throwing out my property. After wasting so much police time with falsely trying to get me arrested, they had no sympathy for my mother-in-law at all. They charged her for everything and I sued her to give me the money to replace my things. That meant she did not have money for a good lawyer and she was going to end up doing jail time here. I was glad because I was finally able to move back into my home after having to jump around living with a bunch of people a couple days at a time. Even at one point I ended up in a shelter because I had nowhere else to go. The only thing that I don't know is how I'm going to explain this whole thing to my wife when she wakes up. I don't think that she ever saw the evil side of her mother and I don't want to get her upset while she is still recovering. For her sake, I honestly would have wished that my mother-in-law could have just hated me without making things go this far and trying to steal my property. I did not mind that she hated me because I could handle that alone, but I was not going to let her get away with sending me to jail. Since that first day I randomly get nervous around police, thinking that I will once again get arrested for something that I didn't do. I just hope one day my life can get back to some version of normal. The moral of the story is that if you have a horrible mother-in-law, never think that she can do something this low. It happened to me and I didn't think she would ever do this either. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you have any stories to share about your own mother-in-law from hell, then please feel free to share your story in the comments. Either way, now let's continue with the next story. This one is titled Corrupt Condo Association Counters Change. This one was cross-posted by user B26354 on our own subreddit. It's been a few years, so I may have some details in the wrong order, but they are essentially correct. I purchased my townhouse in the late 2000s. The previous owners were motivated to sell for a good price. It was exactly what I wanted: 2 bedrooms, multiple bathrooms and a garage. From the mandatory home inspection, I was told about several potential problems with the unit. Some were internal and others dealt with an outside balcony, leaky windows and cracked exterior paint. Before finalizing the sale, I was given the opportunity to ask about these issues and was told that I was responsible for everything inside the townhouse and the outside problems were handled by the condo association. And also, I just had to submit requests for repair if I needed. The condo association fee was very cheap for this area, so I considered that a plus. I closed on the sale and I moved in without any problems. The total number of units in the complex is about 130, so it is a decent size. Some of them have 2 bedrooms, some have 3, and only a few, like mine, have garages with exterior balconies on them. When I moved in, I was presented with a list of the association's bylaws for the property. Nothing major, most were what you would expect, like keeping your entryway clean, dogs on leashes, guest parking and such. There was a 1 pet limit that I could see everyone was ignoring, so I saw they were a bit lenient with the rules. I became friends with a neighbor and she told me that the association was slow to handle problems. In fact, most of the units, co-joined in groups of 6 or more, were in dire need of new paint. Almost every unit had problems with their windows, but the association was only replacing windows on the backs of the units and only a handful at a time. The association's communication was pretty poor. We would get infrequent newsletters, but they had an underlying tone of, "We will get to your issues when we can, no sooner than we feel like." They would also announce condo association board elections, but there seemed to be little interest, so they would appoint other owners to the board as needed. About 2 years in, I got a printed newsletter from an owner in the complex who we will call Mike, claiming the board is ignoring the owners. It detailed a few things that were not being addressed, like the paint and windows, and owner protests were being ignored. The board was not even holding annual open user meetings, which are specified in the association bylaws. Those meetings were also for holding elections of new board members. The letter demanded a change in the situation. Enter Karen. This was not her actual name, but it rhymes with Karen. She was the association's treasurer on the board. She was controlling the board and her word was apparently law. That newsletter specifically called for her to step down. Next thing we know, there is an official association newsletter mailed to us that calls the owner's newsletter a complete fabrication and claimed Mike had ulterior motives. There was nothing to address the problems Mike mentioned, it was just a generalized attack on him. Mike was initially asking for access to the association's books and the association refused to show them to him. This is guaranteed in the association bylaws. We received another newsletter detailing this and how he was going to take them to court if he was continually blocked. Another response from the association was mailed, but it was just attacking Mike and questioning his motives. I was then visited by another neighbor who was circulating a petition demanding change and I gladly signed it. Nothing was being done aside from standard groundskeeping and the occasional emergency repair. We received a few more letters from Mike and several rebuttals from the association, and Mike successfully sued to have access to the books. From the newsletters, he reported that what he saw was just a list of code numbers, not names, and dollar amounts for payouts. There was no way to really know who was receiving the money or why. Somewhere in all these newsletters, it was revealed that Karen, who was an accountant, was being paid by the association for her time. She is an accountant. Mike's newsletters also revealed that Karen chose the maintenance company, which was managed by Maren, Karen's sister. Wow, that was surely a surprise. Not. The situation was getting worse, tensions were high. Somewhere in here, the association mailed out a newsletter that claimed all the rebuttals they were mailing out were costing them a lot of money, more like $50 if you considered the postage, and it had to stop. Also, they announced that they were accepting candidates for the new election and the form had to be mailed back in by a certain date. It was a step in the right direction, but I soon realized that we received the newsletter on a Saturday and the deadline for submitting was the following Tuesday. Karen could easily claim that no one had sent in their forms by the deadline. Other owners told me she had been doing this trick for years so she could appoint anyone she wanted to the board. The association was using a PO box and the only way to get an application in on time was to go to the post office where the box was on Monday and send a certified letter to prove that it was received in time. Fat chance, Mike and his friends had hand-delivered those newsletters. One time I saw someone walking around the complex delivering the newsletter. I went down to retrieve it from my mailbox right away, but I also noticed that Karen was going to every mailbox pulling these newsletters out and was throwing them into the garbage as she went. I heard her say something like, "It was not legally mailed." After that event, Mike sued to force a proper election and the judge ordered it. For the election, we had to have a 2 out of 3 owner majority present either by attendance or by signed proxy. On the day of the election, many of us arrived at the meeting and we noticed a security guard was standing by Karen, who was checking everyone in and giving them a ballot. She was expecting trouble. I heard her tell people that they couldn't vote because they were in arrears with their monthly dues, had outstanding fines, or were told they were not the official owner of record. She disqualified many people, there were some arguments, but the security guard kept things civil. Note that our bylaws don't say anything about who can and cannot vote aside from the owner on record. On top of that, only a couple of candidates made it onto the ballot, excluding Mike and several others who had definitely applied. The meeting started with Karen giving some general information and the members were talking amongst themselves a lot. Many were PO'd about being refused a ballot and others were complaining about all the candidates missing from the ballot. One of the last bits of information was that Karen announced that they would refuse any future letters sent by certified mail because it required someone to go to the post office and acknowledge delivery on a certain date. She would normally get the mail whenever she felt like it. Karen was trying to circumvent the law by conveniently ignoring timely letters like candidate applications and our monthly dues. Some owners brought up the possibility of re-entering Mike and the other candidates onto the ballot as write-ins, and the crowd voted with him, but the board refused to recognize the vote. Lastly, the votes were collected and counted, but the board president announced that they did not have a majority, so the election would be cancelled. We were only short a few people. The number of people Karen did not give ballots to would have tipped the balance. What a surprise! The board quickly adjourned the meeting and left before people realized what was happening. That was a fun night, no one was happy. Mike was paying out of his own pocket for his lawyer, and it was getting expensive. I heard the number $20,000 was mentioned. People did help defray the cost by donating to the cause, though. Mike was not done. He went back to court another time to sue for a legal election. There was nothing in the bylaws that denied voting rights for past due balances, and Karen lied about at least one owner not being the owner of record. Armed with that information, the judge ordered another election to be supervised by an independent third-party lawyer. As I recall, the association's lawyer quit because they kept going against his advice. They replaced him with a yes man. The third-party lawyer was in complete charge of the election, including collecting candidate applications. A reasonable deadline for applications was set, 2 weeks, and proxy ballots were sent out as well. Karen's position was up for election, as were 2 other positions. We found out that the board president was appointed by Karen, but he was not an owner and had to step down. Only owners can serve on the board. Finally, the election came and pretty much everyone showed up or had provided proxy votes. There was definitely a 2 out of 3 majority present, not including proxy votes. The lawyer called for 3 volunteers from the owners to count the ballots. The results were that 4 new people joined the board that night. They had gotten around 80 to 90 votes each. Another active board member got 17 votes and Karen got 15 or something like that. We presume her votes were all proxy votes. I was wondering if they were going to go after Karen for getting paid and cooking the books, but the new treasurer received everything with proper records, names this time and not numbers. And then the maintenance company was tossed out almost immediately. Karen sold her unit and moved to Florida, but not before arranging for some exterior beautification around her unit, complete with plant boxes, flowers and shrubs. We think she saw the writing on the wall and moved out before any backlash could occur. The association's lawyer was also replaced. Then came the bad news. The association had to pay out almost $50,000 in legal fees to fight against Mike and his lawsuits. Since the association was paying for the lawyer, we could not put the bill on Karen. What a pity. We later discovered that the long-term project fund used for major upkeep of the complex was pretty badly depleted and needed to be refilled. Our lawyer advised us that for the size of the complex it needed to be over $2 million, but there was less than $1 million in the fund. Fortunately, they did not demand assessments but instead raised the monthly dues to start making up the difference. In the 15 years I've been here, the dues went from $150 to $375 and go up annually now. Karen had ignored many of the long-term projects, and in the next 2 to 3 years the buildings were repainted, the roofs were reshingled, bad windows were replaced and all the balconies were completely rebuilt. In more recent years, our insurance company demanded we repave the roadway because it was falling apart in places. They would not insure it unless that was done immediately. These days we have a better and more responsive maintenance company and a Facebook page for general announcements and chit-chat. There are no real winners in this case, but after all of the required improvements were done, most of us feel better living here than during the dark time of Karen's reign. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this story here on our own subreddit. Shout out once again to user B26354, and by the way, what an amazing username, for sharing this awesome HOA story. If you have any HOA stories of your own to share, then please feel free to post them on r/ripe stories on Reddit. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again tomorrow.